Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Basics with Preach, where today we're going to look at moving while performing. Ah yes, moving and performing. It doesn't matter if we're tanking, DPSing or healing is one of the most crucial things to learn in order to get much better at World of Warcraft. It's very easy to see if you jump into any group that people develop these strange habits. They start dancing around while they're moving, or they simply fall apart as soon as that meteor starts falling from the sky, or they have to gather up and do something. Is they stop playing their characters essentially, probably out of fear of being crushed into the ground or simply dying, and we don't want that to happen. However, as we move up and we get better, and a great example here would be Limit, the best guild in the world, at Sire Denathrius on their world first kill. As you can see, no matter which POV you look at, no matter what those guys are doing on a fight that is intensely designed to cause your character to never be stood still, look at the bottom of the spell bar. Look at all those spinning actions. That is because they're utilizing every single possible opportunity to do something with their character. And that is what we're going to learn about today. We're going to implement all of this into your gameplay as simply as possible, and we're going to be able to utilize something that we don't ordinarily see good usage out of, which is the training dummy. Here we are in front of the training dummy in Orgrimmar, beautiful Orgrimmar, where we have to visit very rarely these days. But we're going to use the training dummy for one of the things it's very useful for, which is a little bit of practice and how to manage certain things. The training dummies aren't great for something like, what is my max DPS? It's not great for that. It doesn't carry the right debuffs. It doesn't carry certain other factors that we'll encounter during dungeon groups or raid encounters, things like that. But what we can do with the training dummies is two things. One, they're really good if you're learning to move from clicking to key binding. As we can just simply train our muscle memory. Most of key binding is just muscle memory. So I can look at the camera now and I know I've just flame shocked. I know I'm casting a lava burst. I know I'm going to do a lightning bolt. I know I can do things like activate Stormkeeper. I can activate my fire elemental. I could do things like this without ever looking at the screen because my fingers know where they're going. Training dummies are really good for this and will hopefully transfer into some sort of gameplay. However, where most people get unstuck with that, of course, is when they start panicking, right? And that's what we're trying to kill with our basic series, is that you guys don't panic, because when panic kicks in, your old habits kick in. So I see this a lot with key binding to clickers, is they might do something on a training dummy where they're like, oh yeah, this is dead easy. And then they get into a dungeon encounter where they have to do things and they start panicking, they're pressing the wrong buttons, and then they start, going back to their old habits. But it's a good way to start getting that muscle memory working, and then we can build up encounters. What about movement then? Well, we can do this really well here at Training Dummy, which is why we're here. We're going to learn about stutter stepping and how we do it correctly, but that's not the only kind of movement that we want to talk about today. So what is stutter stepping? Stutter stepping. Interesting and ironic, I stuttered when saying that. Quite simple. When we press an ability, you can see all our abilities have this circular effect. This where the spells are blacked out and it'll do a very little spin. World of Warcraft has a relatively low global cooldown, certainly comparative to something like Final Fantasy XIV. But we want to utilize that nonetheless, because while this is spinning, we can't cast any more spells. It's physically impossible. There are some spells in the game that are off the global cooldown. Those are things you should be aware of for sure, but for the most part, near enough every single spell is on the global cooldown. Now, global cooldown is something that we can utilize to our advantage. Where can't we? When we're hard casting spells. When we're doing something that's channeled, something like that. Because as you can see, if I fire a lightning bolt, the global cooldown will finish before I fire the spell. Alright, which means I can immediately lead into another lightning bolt. So this is a hard-casted spell where we need to stand still. However, I'm on an elemental shaman right now, but this works for every single class in the game, is that we can utilize our instant cast spells. Instant cast spells are very important. So on an ally shaman, for example, we have a whole bunch of them. We've got things like Flame Shock, we've got our Covenant ability, we've also got totems we can drop, we've got elementals we can drop, we've got shields we can put up, we've got things like healing stream, a whole bunch of stuff that we can do while moving. Now I mentioned things there that aren't just DPS spells, right? That's totally fine as well. What you want to be doing is something with your time. This is where people fall apart when they read written guides, or even if I was to produce, say, a DPS guide, then I wouldn't probably mention things like this, because if your goal is to do the absolute best straight-up DPS in an ideal environment, such as like a patchwork type fight or something that's very similar to a training dummy, it's not something we would talk about. And it's where a lot of people get unstuck when they read, like, what are the best talents? Things like that. Where sometimes you'll actually, if you go to the logs and see what the top players are doing, is they're not using those best talents. In fact, they're using things that allow them to move better, because the fight calls for a lot of movement. Okay, so what are we going to do? We can practice here by saying, I want to get from here to over here without losing any DPS. How am I going to do that? Well, it's very simple, really. We're going to utilize our instant cast spells in order to start moving, right? So while we're doing DPS and our raid leader or our dungeon or something like that has asked us to move, we're going to look for opportunities, right? Earthshock is one. So I can Earthshock, and you can see I'm moving while that's happening. Yeah, so you understand a very basic idea is I've moved. Here we got a lava surge proc. Okay, I can move. Look how far you can move during a global cooldown. I could shock again, and I can move. And already I am moving across the platform. I have flame shock to refresh, so that means I can move. I've moved all the way over there without losing a spell cast. Right? It's not about optimal spellcast here. We're just learning how to use stutter stepping in a correct and simple way. Because we can force it as well. We could say, oh, I have movement coming up. Okay, so I'm going to Stormkeeper here. Watch this. So I can Lava Burst. I can Stormkeeper into that. I can Earthshock into this. And I can move all the way over here without losing a spellcast. Doesn't matter that it's not optimal. And this is, again, where people fall down, and I don't want you to fall down either, is they have a very strict priority of spells that must be cast in a certain order, otherwise you're losing DPS. Trust me, you are losing way more DPS by simply not casting any spells. Okay? There's a common sense approach to this that I really want you guys to understand, which is that you are always going to do more by casting more. All right, so a great example would be someone tried to catch me out on a Frost Mage, because my Frost Mage, as I had to move certain yards, and I had to move because there was some explosion going on, is I cast Iceland, so it didn't have the proc. And they had read in a guide that Iceland should only be casted when it's going to do some extra buff or something like that. And then they clipped it and tried to send it to people, and then they got blasted for it, because it's like, the alternative is not casting anything. Okay, the alternative is just not casting anything, which means we can do things which might seem wrong. Let's say we needed to do a little movement, and we don't have any instant cast spells available that are part of our DPS rotation, right? So one of them would be Flame Shock here. Ideally, you want to replace Flame Shock when it's like about to run out, because you don't want to just keep spamming Flame Shock, because we could do that on an Ellie Shaman, but it's not really beneficial for us to do that. So we have to move. And we have nothing we can really cast. So what we're going to do? We're going to replace Flame Shock. Why? Because that means when we do get to stand still again, it's up for a much longer period of time. And we utilize that fact that we had to move in some useful way. It's a very simple thought process. It's like, okay, I don't have the optimal thing to do here. What should I do? Well, replace your Flame Shock. It's fine. Nothing's going to happen. You're totally fine. You're totally fine. And when you do get to stand still, you'll get to cast a lot more before then having to replace something like a Flame Shock or a Moonfire or a Shadow Word Pain. All those kinds of things make it very simple. Okay, so what if we need to move really fast? Well, this is where we have to make that decision. So we've talked about stutter stepping. Stutter stepping is something that we could do when we've got a leisurely amount of time. We have to move from here to here, but we have, say, 15 or 20 seconds to do it. Okay, so I can use my Flame Shock. I have a Lava Surge here. I can stop and I can cast. And I'm like, oh, but I have a Lightning Bolt to cast here. Cool, so I'm going to use that. And then I've got another one, and I can do over here. You can see all kind of works together in a nice, harmonious way. But that's leisurely. And this is where we save our other movement cooldowns in order to go in with this. Because what I often see, certainly in the case of a Shaman, is if they have to move even from here to here, you'll see them go into Ghost Wolf or something to move to here. Absolutely unnecessary, totally crazy. But if we have to move very far, very quickly, that's where our other abilities come in. Our other abilities, such as on a Shaman, Goblin Jump. That's why we saw when Goblin came in, so many people move over to Goblin Jump. Of course, if I wasn't a Goblin, yes, if I had to move really quickly, really far, I would use Ghost Wolf, because it's the fastest way of getting there. And ultimately, you're just trying to figure out a very simple process. If I have to move a good distance very, very quickly, that's when I'm going to use my movement spells. But I'm also going to pop out of them as soon as humanly possible. right? I'm going to pop out of them and get back to casting, because once I'm nearly in my position and maybe I've got a couple of seconds left, I can do things like pop out and replace that flame shock while I finish the final couple of meters, things like that. Least of all, our golden rule with moving while performing is we want to move as the least amount of time possible. We don't want to move we don't want to move, because what we want to do is be stood still and turreting and basically trying to turn the boss into a training dummy. That's our goal. That's what we're after in all occasions. And what we're trying to do here, and what I'm trying to show you, is the ways of utilizing your class in order to do that in more occasions than others. What we don't want to do is what I see so often, and we can go back to some of the footage here, is people, as soon as any movement occurs, they just start running around. And they're just running and running and running and running and running. And what you'll see in a lot of cases is quite simply you just did less in terms of how many resources you got. Your class is also less fun to play, and it's often the reason we see a lot of people saying, this fight is rubbish, I have to move around a lot, instead of utilizing it as an opportunity, which is what I would hope most of you would do. So thank you for watching. Go and train this on a training dummy, jump into some normal content or anything like that, and you should have a whale of a time learning this. And honestly, it's quite satisfying when you do it correctly. It's really quite satisfying. My hair is looking really poofy today. I'm a poofer. Don't include that. Thank you once again for watching a Basics with Preach. I'm so happy to see all the suggestions below our videos for other things that you think a lot of people need to learn, or you see basic mistakes that people are making. Keep putting them down there. We're working through them as quickly as we can. Tune in next Monday for another Basics, and I'll see you again. Bye, guys.